ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Grow Your Moving Company podcast. I'm your host, Wade Swikle, and today's guest is Dan Hilton, who leads the ATA Moving and Storage Conference that I will be going to and conducting a speed mentoring session as one of the speed mentoring speakers. And I'm really looking forward to it this year. It's out in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was just telling Dan that I've only been in Nashville once, and I was 24 years old and went there for different reasons aside from moving. It's a fun city, and looking forward to connecting, building a lot of great relationships out there, and learning a lot about, the different types of work and what's trending in the industry, and all the good stuff that comes from that conference. Moving and Storage Conference I went to was actually when it was AMSA, and we recently became members of ATA. Loving already the connections that it's bringing, and I'm really looking forward to talking to Dan here on the podcast and seeing what you guys got cooking. So Dan came from a life on the Hill, working in politics over in Washington, D.C., still lives in Washington, D.C., and has done various roles in different trades over the years. And he's found this fun game that we call Moving and Storage. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, Dan. I know we've had some conversations prior to this, but in your own words, tell me a little bit, what's your background and how'd you get involved in moving with the ATA and the Moving and Storage Conference?
Sure. Good morning, and thanks for having me. I enjoy this, and we enjoy your recent membership and getting involved. So, yeah, as you mentioned, I spent a lifetime on Capitol Hill. I went there shortly after college. I was there at some exciting times. I got my start at the House Armed Services Committee, and I was there in 2001. So you can probably imagine what it was like being on the Hill when we were under attack. Was a very, very exciting, serious time. It was very interesting for a guy in his 20s to be there at the center of real policy making, of writing the National Defense Authorization Act, which is still integral to movers today. So from the Armed Services Committee, I knew I wanted to work in individual member offices. So I went and worked for a member, Congressman Walter B. Jones, who interestingly represented Camp Lejeune, a massive military installation. So that was a great early foundation for working with military families who, they're asked to sacrifice a lot. Their loved one gets sent off to defend our freedom. And as we know, they're also asked to move every couple of years. So that was a early experience to working with this community. Then from there, went and moved to another member of Congress in West Texas, did more of a senior role advising him. And from there, I had the unique opportunity to open up the Washington office of a trade association that's headquartered in Chicago. So they represent plumbing wholesalers and manufacturers. And this is during the beginning of the Obama era. They knew they wanted a voice in Washington. So that was a really exciting time to tell their story on the Hill for the first time. No one had really was familiar with this industry, even though we literally use them first thing in the morning when we wake up, plumbing facilities. So reminding folks on the Hill how integral they were into housing and construction, into, the job markets. So it was a really unique time. And, as I like to say, I was doing remote before remote was a thing. It was literally before Zoom existed. It was before Teams existed. It was a great experience telling their story, and not just telling their story, but also trying to explain Washington to them. Because a lot of folks, for good or bad, they usually get frustrated and angry at their policymakers. So helping to explain it to them and try to navigate them through the halls of Washington, of Congress, was a really fun experience. And then from there, I moved to the American Council of Engineering Companies, which much bigger, represented civil engineering firms. So very involved in infrastructure and road building, which is along the lines of ATA, which led me to ATA. And as you mentioned early on, the Moving and Storage Conference, which has its roots in AMSA, the American Moving and Storage Association, really is sort of a mini trade association. As I had alluded to, that's where I got my professional start, is working for trade associations doing just their advocacy. But this is, I think, a step beyond that, doing not just the advocacy for the movers, but we have, as you mentioned, our annual meeting upcoming in a month that we'll talk about, as well as, various programs and services that we provide for the movers. So it's been a great opportunity. It'll be 2 years in August, and it's been great. I really really enjoyed learning really the intricacies and the layers of what goes into a move, which is, like many things, a lot more complicated than the average man on the street understands.
Yeah, I have some friends that work in other trades, and they always love to say, man, moving must just be so easy because you guys don't have to hire these, skilled trades that do carpentry or electrical or plumbing or doors and windows, garages, all that good stuff. And I'm like, you would be very surprised how many nuances and how difficult it is. I mean, we're jealous of those trades because they get a pool of skilled labor who have to get certified and tested and, go to trade school or whatever to be their boots on the ground and their customer facing people. Whereas there isn't really like a mover trade school that exists. I know obviously there's private trainings. Obviously we have one with Tighten Up Training. A lot of companies have their own, but there isn't like, you can't go to, I don't even know if ITT Tech exists anymore, but like a formal trade school to become a mover. A lot of people find their way into moving because it's a low barrier to entry. And I like to say it's a low barrier to entry, but a high barrier to success because there is a lot of competition. There's a lot of rogue movers out there that don't follow the best practices and aren't properly licensed and insured and don't use the technology and the resources that we have available and organizations like you. And I know that that's a big mission with ATA and the moving and storage conferences to kind of elevate that industry. But tell me a little bit, what is, in your words, the mission of the ATA and the moving and storage conference specifically?
Sure. No, you hit right on where I wanted to go. Is the barrier to entry is lower, which is good, can be great to bring new entrants into the moving and storage world, but it also has its negative impacts. It doesn't prevent the bad actors from joining the industry, not the association, and they have, unfortunately, the ability to deceive the public. I remind folks when I talk to folks like you and reporters, as moving is extremely stressful. Finding that forever home is extremely stressful. I went through it. My wife was 9 months pregnant when we finally moved. She had the baby when I moved into our house where I am right now. Movers, the bad actors, they know that. They know that especially in this economy, homeowners are stretching themselves beyond their housing budget. They're leaving no money left over for their move. So they're not getting multiple quotes. They're going with the lowest bidder. They probably don't realize that person should be coming into their house, or at a minimum with today's technology, a lot of the partners that you guys partner with do at least a video search of that house. They need to know of the multiple staircases, whether it's narrow, whether it's, how heavy a lot of the furniture is, and they're getting taken advantage of. It's very sad when we get emails and phone calls when folks find me to ask us to help them. If they're calling me, it's in many ways it's too late. Their stuff is either held hostage or has been ransomed or sold. And I have to explain to folks, we are not law enforcement. We have no law enforcement authority. First of all, I don't believe any of our members would do anything like that. And again, those that would do something like that, they're not joining their industry trade association. And even if they did, we don't have any punitive authority to slap them on the wrists if they commit such an egregious crime like that. Consumer protections really is something we want to focus on. Now that we have the military move issue, the global household goods contract issue, really in the back burner, in the rear view mirror, which had really taken up a lot of our attention and energy, we do want to explore how we can provide, stronger consumer protections. We have several provisions within the surface transportation reauthorization. We don't know if they've been accepted or not, but that is the sort of multi-year, every 5 years, they reauthorize programs to provide roads and bridges, provide grant funding for American highways and roads. So we have several proposals in there to try to get stronger protections for the consumer. They're not our constituent, but we want to ensure that the professional mover has a good face. And as you touched on, that ultimately is our constituency, is representing the professional mover. And a lot of these bad guys are really giving us a bad.
No, you're absolutely right. One of the things that makes it really challenging is, I mean, you hit it right on the head. It's the third most stressful time in a person's life behind death and divorce is when they have to move. And unfortunately, a lot of people have to move because of death and divorce. So that just compounds the issue. A lot of people move for good reasons too, but people are attached to their stuff. And, it's a very intimate experience when a mover is coming into somebody's home, seeing how they live, whether that's clean or not so clean, going through things, if they're, packing boxes, going through drawers, seeing all of their things that the world doesn't see. And these are strangers coming into people's homes, and, they're handling grandma's antique rocking chair. They're, doing something, the packing up the kids, sentimental stuffed toys that they're attached to, all these different variables that come in. And unfortunately, there are those bad actors that give the moving industry overall this stigma, this bad name that we have to overcome every single time we set foot into somebody's home. And people are a lot of times looking for, ways to exploit that because maybe they had a bad experience in the past, or they heard about somebody who had a bad experience in the past. And they start off skeptical, and it's our mission to find the best practices to turn that skepticism into comfort and make them feel like they're being treated professionally. And I think one of the biggest issues that I've found is, especially in Florida, especially South Florida, there just isn't enough of that law enforcement, that compliance regulatory body. And I'm usually not the biggest fan of government, it's big government overreach, but there is a necessary balance there. And making sure that we communicate to the governing legislative powers that, this would solve so many problems if we had some additional requirements. Maybe an operator has to pass a test or something, like most other industries, contracting. I mean, you can't get a haircut without somebody who's passed,
Yeah.
a certification for that. I mean, in Florida, it's really as easy as just sending in a $600 application fee and, a proof of insurance, and you can usually get granted a license. And unfortunately, you see these pop-up companies that they'll pop up in the summertime under one name. They'll rip a bunch of people off. They'll disappear once the low-hanging fruit is gone from the summer moving season. And then they'll reincorporate and they'll pop up again the next summer. And so it's really hard to keep tabs on all of those different, entities. And, I love what you guys are doing, because I feel like there's so much room to both enforce, those bad actors that give us all a bad name, and just to raise the bar and make sure that, our industry is treated like a professional trade, just like, HVAC or plumbing or whatever else. Because if we can be treated as a professional trade, people are going to respect the cost that we have to charge to do business the right way. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people just kind of lump all movers together, and they just want the cheapest one because they assume that they're just going to get ripped off no matter who they use. But it's really not the case. I've met so many awesome moving company operators and owners over the years, both from our own events, through AMSA, ATA type stuff, through the Louis Massaro stuff back in the day, going out to these events on Facebook groups that we have. And most of the people that are involved in that stuff truly are trying to lift up the industry.
No, and I think you hit on several good points, especially in the states. Use your state of Florida. I'll give two examples. Unfortunately, technology is moving faster than regulations. You have app services like Carvana where you can do everything over the app. Well, the bad guys realize that. They're, inserting themselves so that you procure their services through an app. Because it's so simple and simplified, you don't realize that you're procuring the services of a bad actor. Other things like, in a negative way, how AI has entered the conversation, as we say. Someone sent me a photograph recently. It was from Florida. It was a rogue operator who was, promoting his company's services through LinkedIn with a big, beautiful orange truck. Well, that looks like an Allied Van Lyon agent, but it's not. It clearly was not. And we heard from Allied that this is not one of our agents, and they're using our trademarked look, coloring, and brand to deceive the public and make them think that they're a reputable operator. Another one that we are trying to get through, as I mentioned, through the surface transportation reauthorization is name spoofing. You have, insert the term, national. There's thousands of companies with the term national. As I tell folks, Van Line it's not a distinction like PE, like the professional engineering. It's not a licensed professional engineer. By calling yourself, Hilton Van Line doesn't automatically make me, reputable, a reputable company. Folks see those two words and they think, oh, well, they're a great company. So there's a lot of things as I mentioned, the taking advantage of someone's, branding, and then taking advantage of using a reputable name. In many states, you can't have two businesses licensed under the same name, but it's not as easily enforced at the federal level, which gets me to the last point of, our regulator, the FMCSA. Well, that stands for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. That's not even law enforcement. That's providing safety on the roadways. So even then we have, who is there to protect the consumer? Another proposal we have is just improve that safer website that the consumer should go to, but they don't even know about that. They don't even know that you can go look up a person's DOT number, look up their motor carrier license number to find out if they've had accidents, if they've had it, if their fleet has been inspected, if they've failed inspections. Again, the website, I won't say the website is poor, they just don't know enough about it. So we need to improve the promotion and marketing of folks investigating their potential mover, because the tools are there. I think they just need to be improved.
Yeah. And I mean, you hit the nail right on the head with the technology kind of outpacing the regulation. I'm wearing my live switch hat here today, and that really came about during COVID because the rights and responsibilities packets that the FMCSA would distribute, or at least require movers to distribute when they would give their quotes, stated that for interstate moves, you had to go to somebody's home and actually do a survey. And you have all these people calling moving brokers thinking they're calling movers that are never going out to see anything. Or maybe they are calling movers and those movers are just trying to, kick back and do it over the phone. You can't accurately quote a large move, especially interstate, doing it over the phone. And then when COVID came about, LiveSwitch came onto the scene. They were already working with other industries before that, but they allowed movers to have the virtual estimates. And I've seen that just take off with, movers that are still leaning heavily into doing virtual estimates. But to give you an example, like we just booked a job coming from out of state to the Tampa Bay area. And I mean, this was our best friend using LiveSwitch to be able to have a recorded video that's super accessible with a link that gets texted right to the consumer's phone. They don't have to download an app. They don't have to have an iPhone. They just have to have a cell phone that can take texts with a camera on it. They click the link and they can walk through the home. It's a recorded presentation where you're face to face with somebody, and it actually uses AI to gather the inventory as they go. So if the salesperson on the other end misses something, well, you've got the AI side of it. And then that integrates directly into our CRM, which is Smart Moving. I think it works with other CRMs too. And even the CRMs have made things so much more transparent, so much more user-friendly, as opposed to the old-fashioned way that everybody was doing for 100 years with the paper bill of ladings on the carbon paper and the inventory sheets. Like now all that stuff can be recorded digitally. AI can be used to make sure we don't miss mistakes or let things slip through the cracks. It can be signed off on digitally so papers can't get lost. And that's what I always tell consumers to look for. It's part of it is educating the consumer. And I think any moving company today needs to make sure they're doing a good job to educate their consumers so they know what questions to ask, whether they hire that company or not. And if you're more expensive than the road mover down the street, well, there's a reason, because you're doing things the right way. You're using this technology to create checks and balances to make sure that every move goes smooth. And that's why I love moving industry events like what you guys are doing with the MSC, the Moving and Storage Conference, is because it brings the movers together and the vendors together to showcase all these different methods that we're all learning that are separating us from those people that are out there to scam, and they're not interested in investing in long-term growth in the business. So that's, it's so good to get in these rooms because it allows you to just brainstorm these ideas on how to overall improve that customer's perception. How do we educate the customers better? Hey movers, it's Wade Swikle, and you're listening to the Grow Your Moving Company podcast. If you've ever wasted money on marketing to the wrong homes, listen up. This is why I use USA Home Listings. They're the only platform in the moving industry built by movers that not only has new home listings and under contract listings updated daily, but now offers enhanced data that can eliminate vacant homes and give you phone numbers and emails for both homeowners and realtors, giving you multiple ways to connect and close more jobs. Their vacancy AI tool removes empty homes so there are no more wasted mailing efforts, and their Tier 2 data takes it further, providing highly accurate contact details for both homeowners and realtors for email, phone, and social outreach. The result? Higher conversions, stronger ROI, and more book jobs with less spend. Check out usahomolistings.com because it's where real movers get real leads. But tell me, like, what are some of the topics that are going to be covered at this year's conference? Because I know it's been a few years since I've been to, AMSA, and we've done our own, but we have our own style with it. I want to learn a little bit more, educate the audience a little bit more on what are the topics. How's the format?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it'll be March 15th to the 17th in Nashville at the Music City Center. For those who were there last year, we'll be there again. We sort of partner with a much, much larger entity at ATA, the Technology and Maintenance Council, which has a massive trade show that our attendees are welcome to take part in. But, as you mentioned, trade associations really do, four things, benchmarking and, data and statistics, networking, which is what we'll be doing here, advocacy, which we'll talk about and which we've been talking about as well. And then finally, editing and training, webinars. So this is really our networking component, our annual meeting, again, March 15th to the 17th. Couple of topics we'll be talking about. Fortunately, we're past the GHC, but we still want to, learn about how folks can continue doing business and do more business with the military and keep that business. So we're going to look at
what's the GHC for anybody who might not know.
The Global Household Goods Contract, which was given to the Home Safe Alliance several years back, and it was unpopular. It was moving from a tender-based system to a prime contractor for military moves. So the prime contractor was the Home Safe Alliance, and that was terminated almost a year ago. So they went back to the previous system. So they're operating on the old system. They are standing up a new office. So moving forward without the prime contractor, but you still under the same previous system that I think the majority of the industry preferred, with some updates to the business rules. So I'm going to be talking about specifically best value scoring 2.0. So when you move a military member, for example, you could potentially, you as a moving company, the customer has the opportunity to provide close to about 5 different surveys on your company's performance. So obviously you want your company, you do the best to train your employees, but you have to send them out on their own to perform a move. You hope you've done the best you can and you've hired the best you can to perform a good move, but then they're representing you out in the field. And then they get graded as they should. So learning how that grading system is performed and how it impacts you is going to be one of our panel discussions. Another one being, a couple of them really are on diversification. How you can, because a lot of only do one or two types of things, whether it's only household moves and no military, or majority military and very few household moves. It's vital to diversify your business. Do some hospitality work. So we're still looking to put together a panel at FF&E on diversifying office and hospitality moves. Have a panel on just navigating federal contracting. There are other, and not just federal but state. There are other government agencies beyond the Department of Defense who require moving and storage services, particularly the State Department. They're sending American employees overseas for 2 or 3 years. Well, as part of that deal, the taxpayers will store your goods. So those are contracts available for movers to participate in. Same thing with the General Services Administration. They're the landlord for the federal government. They operate all the federal government's buildings. Again, a lot of shifting around of furniture and relocations. So that's another opportunity to contract with them. So we have a couple of panelists who will talk to us about federal contracting within the federal government. ATA has its own research institute. The ATRI, the American Trucking Research Institute. They do several reports, but one of their marquee reports is the operational cost of trucking. So we're going to hear from the analyst who put that report together to answer questions on what it costs to maintain your fleet. Then, of course, getting to where you and I became acquainted, being the independent movers, one of our most important and most valuable members of the MSC. We have two very exciting sessions, one that you're going to be part of called Speed Mentoring. Very simply, we have three different groups, three different tables of about 20, led by a mentor. You're obviously going to lead one on training. We have someone else leading one on telematics. Then we have another one leading on the claims process. So, the mentors will all stay seated. The groups will shuffle around and hear their pitch for a couple of minutes and just really lead a discussion, as we talked about. A lot of the value of these networking events is hearing from your peers what's working for them and what's not working for them, especially if they're not in your market and they're not a competitor. Folks shouldn't have any reason not to share the sauce of what they've been doing that works for them. And then finally, we're going to conclude with what is really the most popular event that we probably need to get you in next year is our dueling perspectives. This year, we're going to have two teams, kind of East Coast versus West Coast. Justin Hart and Jeanette Holman representing the West Coast, and then Jason Moyer and Stefan Cordero representing the East Coast. They're going to get about 8 or 10 different topics, and they have to take a position. They have to defend that position. It's kind of an old school high school debate. And then this year, attendees are going to be able to vote on the app of who they agree with, who defended their position best, and we're going to have a winner, declare a winner at the end.
Very cool. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm really getting interested in FF&E and more corporate relocation stuff. So, I mean, we are an independent mover. We've got a few different locations, but the van lines seem to have such a stranglehold on the military government work, the corporate work, the account work. But we just moved into the old Sudeth campus here in Tampa Bay. They moved to the Tampa side. We moved to the St. Pete side, and it's awesome. It's built for movers. They've got a weigh scale. We've got a huge warehouse that's set up exactly how we need it to be set up. Big parking lot. It's going to be great. But now we have the capability to do a lot more FF&E and a lot more corporate account work, designer receiving, final mile, all that kind of thing. But a few years ago, I've stayed away a little bit from military stuff because a few years ago I did a podcast with I think it was Oded, who's still very involved with ATA back when it was AMSA. And he was telling me that military work has a lot more red tape, a lot more paperwork. They're a lot more nitpicky, and they don't pay as much as household goods. And he's like, if I, was just getting started, if I was in your shoes, I'd probably stick with household goods because it's more profitable and it's less tedious. Is it still that way with the military work, or do you see anything changing there? Because I feel like it's turning away a lot of great movers that otherwise could be competing for bids.
Well, no, you're not wrong. And that was one of the challenges under the one-time global household goods regime was they had to operate under a new federal law, the Service Contract Act, which they've never had to in the past. So having to learn that, which again, the contractor and the government did not do a good job of providing the guidance. So as you said, it did turn away a lot of movers. As we told our allies on the Hill, there's 300,000 moves. This was a $19 billion contract. There's a lot of work to be done, and movers want to do it. But as you said, if they're not going to make money, if they're going to lose money, why would they do it? So, you have to be realistic, but as you said, and as Oded said, yes, there's a lot more red tape, which is part of one of the panels that we're going to be talking about. There is a lot more regulations, rules of the road, but and the pay is potentially, I don't know what everyone makes on a move, but I would say the pay is consistent. You're going to get paid by your customer if it's the government. It might not be as much, but it's going to be consistent, and you're going to have if you perform and you do a good job, you're going to have a reliable, consistent customer. That's one thing I could say about doing work with the government.
Yeah. And from what I understand, a lot of times there are some net terms with the government too, that can be difficult for a smaller company to be able to front, a large moves and not get paid for 30, 60, 90, 120 days even. I don't know if it's still, what that status is, because I really haven't looked into it much lately. We've done some privately contracted work on the MacDill Air Force Base here in Tampa, but that's just been, somebody calling that lives on the base needing to move out, and, we go help them privately. Maybe they get reimbursed. I'm not sure, but it's a pain. I mean, you have to have your top guys that are going to pass their background check every time they enter or exit the base. And they are, it's an hour or two of just waiting in line with all the other service vendors while they inspect each vehicle under the hoods, under the chassis, in the boxes. They're running background checks on everybody, and you're paying those guys for that downtime. And so it's tough, if they're paying a lower bulk rate, and the independent private stuff, they pay our normal residential rates, but I could see how that could be a big challenge. Do you see that more of the military work is handled by the big corporate van lines that have the logistics infrastructure to handle all the bases, or is there room for independents to find some kind of work in the military side or the government side?
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely room for independence. And I'll tell you what, one of the key reasons why the GHC failed to launch, and it ultimately failed, was, as you described, it turned away a lot of the good movers. The result is you still need to, the orders for the military, the service personnel, they never stopped. Still 300,000 moves a year. But the GHC and the Transcom and the government had to go out and hire the B and the C team. These are the ones that were breaking stuff, were not showing up. They were arriving late. They're delaying the moves because the A team didn't want to deal with this BS. And that was part of the problem why it collapsed, because they refused to be a reasonable partner. So again, they turned away a lot of the A team.
I want to take a second and tell you all about Tighten Up Training. As a co-founder, we've spent months and months and months and a lot of money pooling together resources from some of the best moving companies in the world. And we're excited to bring this to an online platform available to any mover to use at an affordable price. Tighten Up Training has over 200 videos, including mover training, your highest turnover position, so that you can reduce claims, streamline operations, give your team the tools to perform at the highest level of service that generate repeat and referral business and allow you to charge higher prices, as well as sales training, marketing training, business development, leadership. We're adding more content as we speak. We've got legal training in there. We've even got door-to-door training for the moving industry, thanks to Lenny Gray at the Moving Titan Retreat. We've seen a massive explosion of moving companies jumping on to Tighten Up Training since the last retreat, and people are loving it. And when you sign up and mention this podcast, we're going to give you a free 6-week onboarding course in order to learn how to hold your team accountable and get the entire team on the platform so that you can have the best off-season and summer season that you've ever had. So go to tightenuptraining.com, schedule your free demo today, and look forward to tightening up.
But yeah, there's certainly room for independence. And that's something, in a perfect world, to be honest with you, we've tried several times to get Transcom to come to me, and Justin Hart talked about this, to get them to, just have a town hall for folks like you and for Justin who want to do more of this business. How do they break into doing more of this business? They should want, folks like you and Justin's business to break in to perform some of these moves. It's in their best interest to spread the work around to the professional movers like you guys.
Is Transcom, is that the military entity that handles the relocation?
And I'll tell you, going back, U.S. Transportation Command was where moving was out of. That's headed by a 4-star general. Again, Transcom is in charge of, ships, trucks, planes, of transporting everything military related. So moving is just a small portion of that. After the GHC failed, they stood up a joint task force. So that was led by a 2-star in the Army, General Curtis, who they spent second half of last year figuring out where they wanted to go forward with military moves, which is where they came to about a month ago. They actually are moving military moves out of Transcom. So it'll be out of the uniformed leadership. It'll be in the civilian leadership under the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. So civilian leadership, the biggest difference is civilian leadership is they're political. They're appointed by the president who's in office. Uniform leadership, they're many of them career civil servant equivalents. So this is moving. So they're in the process of standing up this new entity. I think it's a PPA, personal property activity. It's going to still be housed at Scott Air Force Base near St. Louis, but ultimately it has a new boss, and that's going to be a civilian overseeing this. So the next president can change that leadership. They can change it to someone else, but it's going to be a lot of changes are coming. For the most part, I think for the better, from what I hear.
That's interesting. So, in order to get involved in military work, I mean, from your experience, do you have to have a military approved warehouse? Do you have to do international moves? Do you have to have hubs around the country? Or are there lines of work that, let's say, an independent moving company that maybe they don't do storage, maybe they don't do long distance, maybe they don't do, especially international if they don't do long distance. Are there lines of work where they can get on base? I mean, we've done projects where we've moved things from one building to another. But it wasn't contracted by the base; it was contracted by another company that contracted us that had to deal with the base. And I'm curious if is there something that fits the typical independent, residential household goods move across town, on base, off the base, into storage, even out of state, even if they do interstate or storage, maybe they've only got one location and they don't have not a van line affiliate. Like, are there lines that they can get involved with their local military base?
Absolutely. That's, and that's the first thing we'd tell folks in any realm of federal contracting. Let's say, for example, we have a shutdown looming. Folks want to know, well, will I get paid? The most important thing to do is talk to your customer. Establish a relationship with your customer, and that's first and foremost. In your case, McDill, and grow from there. What you're doing with McDill, you're creating a track record. Assuming you have no negative marks, you're slowly building a track record of performance with your local military installation. Then you can move further north to, I can't remember what the base is called, the Pensacola. It's escaping me, but another opportunity. You mentioned, and I think this is a benefit of the annual meeting coming up. Many independents have interline agreements with van lines, and that's really how the industry has evolved. A lot of them were formed in Indiana and in the Midwest, and they rely on each other throughout the country to help load and unload a lot of those household goods. So I think that's the benefit of meetings and networking like this is you just have to have conversations with folks and say, you're going to be a mentor, but I think this is another opportunity to find a mentor to figure out how to break into this world. And that's really, the number one reason why folks should be going to meetings like this is to how they find, because like you mentioned, Oded is an independent, and he does a lot of military moves. So picking brains of folks like that is really how it's done.
Yeah. When people ask me, what's the key to your success? What would you recommend for somebody starting a moving company today? I say, find a mentor. It took me 5 or 6 years before I found some mentors. It wasn't until there were Facebook groups like the Moving Company Owners Unite group, Louis Massaro, and I actually got to meet some of these people. And from there, it went from plateauing under $1 million, where I was struggling for 4 or 5 years, to skyrocketing up to multi-million dollars, multiple locations, because of the key things that mentorship was able to tell me. I mean, simple things: how to structure your financials, how to do sales, how to set up your org chart, stuff like that gave me that foundation. It was like somebody turned the light switch on, and it was like the beginning of the Wizard of Oz, where it's all in black and white. Now it's in color, and it's this whole new world. So, that is the number one thing I would suggest for anybody who's struggling, who is maybe just starting off, is find somebody who's successful in another market doing a type of business that you want to do. And to this day, I mean, that's also why I started this podcast. Once I started making some of those connections, is because it's basically an hour-long mentoring conversation, and I've had hundreds of them now with these people that I meet, and I get to ask the questions that I'm really genuinely curious about, like this military, what I just asked, because I don't know it all. I know certain things about certain subjects in moving that have worked out pretty well in a cookie cutter, in my lane, but I'm trying to expand those lanes and learn everything that I possibly can. So that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm happy to provide mentorship, and I'll be seeking mentorship myself.
Yeah. And I think at the national level, it's not as easy. I remember I was at the Pennsylvania Moving and Storage Association last October, And it was really a collection of, I'll say, veterans of the industry. And there was several movers, in their 20s and early 30s who you could tell were just one fleet, one truck. And that you could just see them having conversations with someone who's been doing this for 20, 25 years. That's how it happens. Those young guys, unfortunately, they don't come to the national. But I do think at the state level, getting involved with many of the state moving associations, I think, is another valuable tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of going back to, the military style of stuff, not necessarily military, but one thing that we're also looking at doing is getting more corporate accounts, whether that's employee relocation or getting into the, corporate purchasing departments or wherever that may be to do commercial moves for the actual company, but especially the employee relocations, because household goods is our bread and butter right now. We do a little bit of business and commercial work, but what have you seen, and are there people that are going to be in the room at MSC that you can form connections with to get in with Fortune 500 companies that are moving people all around the country, all throughout the year? I mean, for example, one of my good buddies from childhood, he works for Hearst, and he moved from Fort Myers to New Hampshire to run a TV station up there. And he'd used us for every move in the past, but now he was getting to more of an executive level where Hearst basically was providing him with a move management company. I think it was called like Lexicon something. I'll have to look it up. And then that move management company was contracting a van line, let's call it Atlas. And then that van line was based in Texas, but he was moving from Fort Myers. So I'm sure they were, reaching out to their agent that was near Fort Myers, who was going to, go through the whole logistical cycle. And thankfully he was able to, go to bat for me, and we still got the move. But it's like, man, how do we get in with this Lexicon move management company? Or how do we get in with these departments at these large Fortune 500 companies? And what departments are those? And who are the people that are coordinating all this stuff? Because it seems like the van lines have that, a very strong grasp with that account work, with corporate account work. Kind of the same question. Is there room for independence for account corporate work for, Fortune 500 companies? And are there going to be connections there? Are there going to be people that you can talk to try to pick some of that up and build those accounts, even if you have one, two, three locations?
No, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That is the one session that I'm still trying desperately to find folks to talk about. And I've gotten several names, and there's several companies that were recommended to me who do, like you mentioned, Odyssey Relocation, Altair Global, Artis. These are all companies who manage the move as you describe, but they contract with most of the van lines and most of the bigger companies to do the actual move. And that's what I'm really I've been trying for this entire calendar year, to find the perfect person to share that secret sauce with the audience of, this is what we're looking for. Ultimately, how our steering committee described it is finding someone who procures moving services. And that's really, as I said, my highest priority right now is finding that right person who procures moving services for employees.
Yeah, I'm fascinated.
I wish I had a name to announce. I don't. I wish I had a name to announce, but I don't. But that's
I think getting in the room, there's going to be people there that have these arrangements and that have these account works. And I think, that's going to be one of my missions while I'm there, is to try to seek out, some of these companies that have that work in different markets. And, what can they mentor me on in terms of getting involved in some of that stuff? And I'm curious if that is something is there any kind of work that you've seen that's exclusive to van lines that independents can't get into on their own, or is really the playing field leveled when it comes to trying to get that kind of work?
No, I think it is. I think it is level. I think, the only thing van lines may have is a scale. They have more of a capacity, but I think it's all at an individual level of how hard you hustle. I think anyone is capable of getting the work. I think you have a great attitude going into this. A lot of folks will go to my, present company included. I can be an introvert sometimes when you're standing in the reception. You have to, strike up that conversation and ask those questions. You already know the questions you want to ask. I think that's a great attitude going into it. Is you're the boss of your company, but if that's what you want if you're sending employees to go to on your to attend a conference like this. That's what you want them to do. Is you need to go into that room, have conversations, pick people's brains, figure out how to win business, and bring that back to me. So I think you're on the right track, and I it's inspiring hearing your excitement to go into those rooms.
Yeah. Most of you have heard me talk about Moversville and the power of their email marketing service that has helped us increase leads by over 112% over the last year. But have you heard of Moversville Connect? Moversville Connect is an incredible resource for all things moving. They feature an array of vendors and services and lists like insurance providers, softwares, equipment suppliers, marketing sources, and much, much more. The best part? This resource is free. Go check out Moversville Connect today by going to moversville.com and clicking Connect. That's moversville.com and click Connect and discover the world of Moversville beyond email. I can be introverted too. I call myself an omnivert. I can turn it on when I need to turn it on, but it's exhausting. And I retreat back to my hotel room at the end of the night, even at our own events. And I'm like, I just need to be alone for a little bit because it's, it's easy. Everybody, from what I've seen at events like this is people like to talk to people, and they like to help people, especially young people with a good attitude that genuinely want to learn, that don't act like they know it all. But what advice do you have for somebody who maybe they're not confident, maybe they're a smaller company, maybe they're an introvert, maybe they're on the fence? Like, is this more just for the big dogs, or is this something for someone like me? Like, how can they get the most out of it? How can they connect with people? Because we all hate those people that just walk up and say, here's my business card. What can you do for me? And versus what can I do for you? Like, what advice, what have you seen, that is cringy behavior? What would you recommend, somebody who's going for the first time that maybe doesn't know anybody there?
No, I think, the most important thing with any trade association is being involved, and we encourage involvement. We want more than just a dues check. We want folks to get involved and take advantage of their association because they help drive the conversation. I think challenging yourself, it's basically 3 full days, challenging yourself to get 10 cards a day. So that's 30 cards. And that's probably not even that much. Not just get 30 cards, but have, follow up with at least a third of them, or at least a half of them. So you're following up with 15 of them the following week. You have to challenge yourself. And I think, that's an individual thing for folks to get, to decide to get their ROI. Our goal is to ensure that, folks come back. It's the same thing. A friend of mine was coaching youth sports. The only goal a coach should have at the end of the season is, if you say, who wants to play next season? If everyone raises their hand, that means you've had a success. If they want to keep playing, it's a success. And I think that's the same thing. If folks want to come back and get more involved with the conference.
Yeah. What's your take on business cards versus like physical cards versus like the digital stuff? I've been running into that a lot.
I've only experienced one person with digital. And that funny, that was my chairman last year, Bill Lovejoy, is the only one I've seen that has the digital card that doesn't have a physical printed card. I think cards are great. I mean, they're unique. They're a conversation starter. My very first association job, there was a vertical card, and you never really see vertical cards.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask, like, is it worth the creativity? I've seen felt cards or like metal cards or square cards. I have this cool little magnetic phone thing that I keep my cards in at all times because I never know when I'm gonna run across. I just met a couple guys at a coffee shop the other day that commented on my shirt, and I said, "Here's some cards." They're like, "Oh yeah, we've seen you around."
That's great.
I was talking to somebody that used to work for me whose dad has a large moving company in Atlanta. And his goal was to hand out 10 cards every single day of his life, not just conferences, but to find, the local barbershop, driving down the street, passing apartments or realtors, or at the restaurant that has the bulletin board up there, put a card on there. And he grew it to be one of the largest moving companies in Atlanta. I won't say who it is. I'm not sure, if they're still, this was a few years ago, but it was, a big, it worked. He hustled and he got out there and he did that. But it's funny because nowadays I'll go to a realtor presentation And I'll ask all the realtors to put their card in a bucket for a drawing at the end of it. That way I collect all their information and can follow up with them. One of the recent ones that I did, they like nobody put a card in the bucket. I think maybe like 2 or 3 people did, and there's 50 people in this room. And somebody was like sheepishly raised their hand, like, our broker told us not to use business cards and everything should be digital now. And so none of us have
Well,
them.
yeah,
And I was like,
that's the downside of digitals. How do you?
well,
I never miss the opportunity. I've yet to win that Yeti, but anytime I see that Yeti there at the table, I'll put a card in.
absolutely. I'd say do both, have the digital thing ready if somebody likes to do it that way, and have some physical cards ready if they like to do it that way. What would you say is the makeup of the event? Like how many like industry vendors versus van line agents versus independent owners versus just employees of, any of those categories
Yeah,
tend to be there? What's the
gosh,
breakdown?
that is a good question because we've grown the exhibit space. We'll have about 26 this year. It's like I said, we're based on the space allowed from us from a technology and maintenance conference. But so, I would say about a third of each, a third, vendors and exhibitors, a third, the agent van lines, all the van lines will be there. And then, about a third of the independents, which is kind of how we break ourselves down. We represent all four when you count the vendors and the allied partners, but really ATA is sort of equally represented between the van lines at the corporate level and then their agents and then the independents. I mean, that's literally how our executive committee and our officers are structured. Each of those is represented, which I think really helps drive us forward.
Nice. Is there going to be any talk on upcoming legislation proposals? I know you guys do your March on Washington every year. Because one thing I've noticed, you mentioned earlier in this conversation about technology outpacing government stuff. We had a random DOT audit a couple years ago, and the agent that came, we had to like explain to him how we do so many different things digitally, because he was so used to auditing these companies that have been around for 100 years that were still on the carbon paper and not doing e-signatures, didn't have a CRM, they didn't have live switch, they didn't do all that stuff. And so he was like fascinated by like how we have all this technology. He's like, wow, this is like not really in my playbook on what to recommend or say about this stuff. He ended up passing us on it, thankfully, but we were a little nervous there for a second because he was like not up to speed on the technology, and it caused me to go down a rabbit hole. And I realized that a lot of the legislation is like 100 years old. I mean, you had like the Motor Carrier Act of 1936, and then again in 1980, which opened up the moving industry for, where they could give out a lot more movers licenses, where it used to be limited to, I think, like 2,000 prior to 1980, and overnight like 40,000 movers popped up. But I know that the big players that were, holding those 2000s, when they got tipped off that this legislation was coming, they helped to craft and lobby the legislation to be favorable to them. And a lot of that still kind of echoes to this day. There's been some updates, I know, but a lot of it is still based off of pretty antiquated policy. Do you see the future of that changing? Is there going to
Absolutely.
be a portion of that discussion at the event?
I'm really glad you brought that up, and I'm definitely going to follow up with you because two things. One, as you mentioned, our call on Washington is September 15th and 17th, and that's really one of ATA's crown jewel programs. We bring state delegations almost every week that Congress is in session. There's going to be there's an ATA delegation going to the Hill. Advancing more trucking priorities, where many of ours also do fall in, like tort reform, English language proficiency. So there's a lot of alignment with our priorities, but ATA is on the Hill every single week, and movers will be on the Hill September 15th. You mentioned a lot of the outdated regulations. That's one of the provisions that we have, one of the proposals that we have, and I was mentioning the surface transportation reauthorization, is to simply create an industry task force, bring us to the table every 6 months to tell them of this technology that's out there, that's leveling the playing field and making it unlevel for the consumers, for the bad actors to take advantage of the consumers. So You would think that that's a pretty simple ask, but one never knows which direction Congress will go. But the final thing, which I mentioned, I'll may recruit you to take part in, is our MSC chair Heather Pereno. We have new leadership at our Government Affairs Committee. One of those priorities is to look at those outdated regulations that you mentioned. We're going to inventory them. We're going to inventory and catalog these regulations and look at line by line, regulation by regulation, see what needs updating and see how we can update it. Because as you said, regs are always are always behind, the technology improvements. So they need to be continually reviewed. So we're going to look at that.
I love it. I'd love to get involved in that. That's definitely something that I've kind of nerded out on. I've got this book. I think it's back here, The Mobile Society. I don't know if you've ever read this. It was written in like the 70s, but it was basically somebody was contracted by whatever the similar organization to ATA is now back then to do a study and to write a narrative on the moving and storage industry. And it's really interesting because it was published, and it's hard to find. I think I got this on eBay because they don't publish it anymore. And if you look at it, it says South Orange Public Library. So I don't know if somebody stole it from the library and sold it, or
it's outdated if a public library is getting rid of it.
Yeah.
I have a few of those books on my shelf from the Library of Congress. That was a really cool thing working on the Hill, is we could go over to the Library of Congress whenever we wanted, which is a beautiful building, but they used to get rid of outdated books like that. And I have a few of them, one on healthcare called like Safety Nets and something, which is just like what you just showed me. It's just an outdated policy manual.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because it hasn't been touched by technology that we have today. So this is how people were thinking back then when a lot of the legislation that came about in that 1980 Motor Carrier Act was formed, and what the thought processes were behind that and what the history prior to that looked like. And it's not adulterated by somebody else's modern day perspective on things. Like, this is from people that were actually around back then. So I recommend that if you can find a copy of it. I would say borrow it, but now I feel like it's a classic that I need to hang close to.
Might be a good auction item at the MSI auction.
Yeah. Check eBay. Maybe you can find it on Amazon. But anyway, how can people get involved? I kind of got off on a tangent there, but if people want to come to the event, whether they're an ATA member or not, maybe they're on the fence about joining the ATA. Do they have to join the ATA to come? Can they come and then join the ATA, or maybe they just want to join the ATA? Like, what's the best way for people to get involved?
No, I mean, our main website, trucking.org, but, as you mentioned, within any association's, conference or convention, there's non-member rates. If you're not a member, we're still happy to have you join us. It's preferable rates for those that are members, obviously. So we'd love for folks to at least come, give us a look under the hood and see the benefits, as you've described, of just getting involved. There's always, within every association, there's cycles, and folks say, I'm not getting my ROI. And that's always frustrating because we work every day to try to provide services for our members. But those are folks that just don't decide not to get involved. And that's that gets back to the conversation about, going into a reception and not getting any cards, or just handing out your card but not having a conversation. It is truly an individual's choice of how involved they want to get. I've been involved in trade associations for 16 years now, and bar none, the best way for folks to get the most out of their trade associations is be involved. Come to the networking events, join the policy committees. I always tell folks, especially when they have to cancel meetings, your business is your number one priority, not us, but we have these opportunities for you to ultimately help your business get better, get more business, to make the environment, better for your business.
Yeah, I think the magic happens just by getting in the room and building those connections. Your network is your net worth. And, even our events, we try to pack it with a lot of valuable information, a lot of great vendors, but the real gold or the real magic happens in those backroom conversations with the other people in your industry that you get to, brainstorm ideas, talk about what's holding you back, what's working well for you, share those ideas, and just have that support group of people that are going through, the same life, not gonna necessarily always say struggle, but the same life path.
Yeah.
because it's lonely at the top sometimes for moving company owners. And this is a great opportunity to meet a new audience, whether you've come to our events or not. If you have, there's a lot of people here that haven't, and I'm looking forward to connecting with them. But there'll be a lot of familiar faces there too. I know Mark Hershey's going to be there, Stephen Reed, a lot of my colleagues that I'm good friends with will be out there. So definitely check it out. It is March, don't have my calendar, March
15th and 17th.
March 15th to the 17th.
Yeah. Our Movers Bash will be on St. Patrick's Day at Martin's Barbecue. Really looking forward to it.
That's dangerous. A bunch of movers on St. Patty's Day. That'll get interesting. Cool. Well, March 15th to the 17th, Nashville, Tennessee. And you have a website specifically for the moving conference entity?
mscannual.trucking.org. mscannual.trucking.org.
Awesome. Well, grab your tickets, guys. It's probably going to sell out. I know hotels are already selling out.
Yeah.
I just locked down mine the other day, and the first option was sold out at the embassy, so I got it over at the Holiday Inn. But
it's a good problem to have when you sold through your room block versus having rooms left over, as you know.
Yeah, well, hope to see you all out there. Dan, thanks so much for coming on. It was great getting to know you a little bit more, and definitely looking forward to learning more at the event, making great connections, and helping anybody that I can help out. So we'll see you all later. And until next time, thank you for tuning in to the Grow Your Moving Company podcast.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Grow Your Moving Company podcast. If you would like to learn more about any of the sponsors listed on this show, want to apply for the next Moving Titan retreat, or interested in owning or working for Two College Brothers franchise, drop me a line at wade@twocollegebrothers.com. Moving out. Have a great day.